And, a week later, I'm playing football with him and his mates, like on an AstroTurf pitch, surrounded by the New York skyline, which is still like a sight that lives with me. And yeah, this portly Brazilian saxophone is teaching me an absolute lesson at football.
To move on from one massive life experience to another involving travel, you studied in New York, and that just seems incredible to me. I wondered if you could give the listeners some insight into what it was you studied and also why New York.
Yeah, less incredible when you consider the circumstances. Like I was working in Leicester for a couple of years at an advertising agency. I'd kind of had enough even before my dad passed away. And that was what prompted me to say, listen, my grandma's left me X amount of money. Like I'm not going to use it for a deposit. Like was earmarked for me in 5-10 years time. I'm just going to use it now to do something for myself that I think will probably grow me professionally and personally and will hopefully, benefit me in the long run. So I used my grandma's money to attend a 9-week filmmaking course at the New York Film Academy, which, unlike traditional schools, is like we have these terms. You can effectively buy a term.
Yeah.
You can do it annually. Doing it annually is very expensive. I'd love to have gone there for a year, but it's probably upwards of like 30 grand. So not something on my radar. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I'll go and do a term. I'll go to the 9-week filmmaking course. I'll stay out there for, a week before, maybe a week and a bit after. And yeah, it was absolutely class. It was like everything I wanted it to be and more, but it could have easily gone the other way. It could have been a much more difficult trip. I'd like to think I'd have made the most of it regardless, but I just so happened to, pick an Airbnb where there was another student at the film school there, Toby from Switzerland. Yeah, he'd been there for some months already, so sort of knew the ropes. Really nice guy. Still speak to him now. I spoke to him, last week actually. He's just had a daughter.
Amazing.
So making friends for life there, and walking into this eccentric sort of setup owned by this woman called Leah. She referred to the house as the tree house on Airbnb. So I knew I was going into bohemian surroundings, let's say. And just there was a Brazilian saxophonist called Josue, asleep on the sofa. Didn't know, who he was, obviously, when I walked in. Got the lowdown in the morning from Toby that this is a guy that he plays the local jaunts, bars, dive bars and whatever, and then uses Leah's place to crash every now and then. and a week later, I'm playing football with him and his mates, like on an AstroTurf pitch, surrounded by the New York skyline, which is still like a sight that lives with me. And yeah, this portly Brazilian saxophone is teaching me an absolute lesson at football. I thought, looking at his smatter, looking at his chubby little belly, thought I'm gonna have a good game here. Like his friends, quite similar, a little bit older, but now just seasoned veterans. Most of them were South American and just sending me for hot dogs on the regular. But yeah, I couldn't recommend the filmmaking course highly enough. And what, just to tap into the motive a little bit more, wasn't only owing to grief, it was also a little bit of regret at not doing a more practical filmmaking course at university. So I picked the university over the course when I went to university. And the University of Nottingham was in the top 10 in the UK. I've been accepted and didn't read all that much into the course, like the campus, liked the university, the idea it was only an hour and a half away in the car from home, that is, and I just went for it. And when I finally got to university and I was doing a lot of theory, a lot of essay writing, I wasn't motivated. I've recently revisited some of the work I did and it was piss poor. And it was just because it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So that was kind of making amends for that, I guess, a couple of years later as well.
Brilliant. And we've had so many people say that New York is their favorite city. So to have someone on who's lived there is incredible. Do you feel like you made the most of living in the city, which many people describe as the best city in the world? Did you go out on many nights out? Did you go to all the amazing restaurants and see all the tourist attractions?
Well, yes and no. I actually didn't do many of the tourist attractions because I was in school 6 days a week. So it was a little bit inhibiting, I guess, from that sense, and it cost a lot of money. So I wasn't doing loads while I was out there, as in, you know, Rockefeller Center, and we did Ground Zero and stuff. But you were doing little things that you just wouldn't have done otherwise, because you were with a group of classmates, or because you were with housemates. Like, we had, you know, a big Italian bloke called Frank come over and made us, you know, the best meatballs I've ever had. And
amazing.
And his advice was just like, I asked him, give me one good cooking tip. And he just said, leave it in a tomato sauce for as long as is humanly possible before you serve it. So that's one thing that will stick with me as well. But as part of the course, we had to make 5 little films, and you had to, because you're in a team of 5, and you had to produce one, direct one, write one. So you touched all the components of filmmaking, right? Amazing. So it was the idea is to give you a well-rounded experience, and that's quite intense to do in, you know, for 3 or 4 weeks. That wasn't the entirety of the course. So you feel like you're maybe not getting to see the sights, but at the same time, I'm also at a veterans home in Harlem, you know, interviewing some guy, and it's just not an experience you get being a tourist, or going to Queens, or I mean, where else? Brooklyn, like renting a little apartment in Brooklyn to shoot in Brooklyn. And it was all geared towards film. Like, I wasn't really asked about the travel aspects, because I was here to learn what I wanted to be my craft, right? But you just do it in the process, and maybe you realize that a little bit later. But yeah, having someone like being taken to a little Brazilian dive bar where they have like what is the cocktail? It's cachaça is the main ingredient, right? I'm talking about the one. This sometimes happens to me. I'm going insane. It's lime, it's sugar. I think it's cachaça and maybe something else. But, you know, just having them for the first time, like properly for the first time, and stuff like that is not things you tend to forget. I would love to go back, obviously, and do some more touristy things. But I think I'd like to stay for another like elongated amount of time. Yeah, because it's quite. I think it's insurmountable in like a week or a long weekend.
Completely agree. It sounds to me like you saw the real New York as well. So maybe you didn't do the tourist attractions, but you saw things of New York which tourists just simply wouldn't be able to do.
And that was only owing to other people's generosity, right? Which is, I think, one consistent theme that probably goes through most. I wouldn't even consider myself that well-traveled at this point. You know, you meet people who are truly well-traveled. I think they rely on the generosity and spirit of others to enhance their experience, right? So you are kind of, you do put yourself in the hands of other people. And if you do so willingly, I think more often than not, you will stand to benefit from it. Obviously, there's horror stories and whatnot, but they only happen at a fraction of the time, it would seem. So I just, say trust the natives to do you a solid more often than not.